Hello and welcome to This Week in Review with Nigel Farage. Nigel, there's two topics on the menu today. One is airlines and one is pub stocks, but they're sort of encountering the same problem, and that is the return of COVID. And I know you're much more interested in the world of pubs than in airlines, so why don't you take away what's occurring in that scenario?
Well, to be truthful, I've spent much of the last 30 years in either of them. So they're both of interest to me. I mean, look, 12th of April, we've got the pub opening. But it's outside or in sheltered covered areas, so it's marquees, it's wooden lean-tos, it's sitting outside, it's whatever it is, but it's not inside. I think two things really. Number one, it'll depend on the weather, and I really mean that, because last April we had the best April in 50 years. It was unbelievable. I mean, every day was stunning. Now, if the weather from the 12th of April when they open is anything like that, it's going to be a boom, for pubs that have got outdoor spaces in the most stunning way. But the famous poet Coleridge once wrote that April is the cruelest month because, you think it's all going to be warm and lovely, and yet you get hail and you get rain and you get goodness knows what else. So the weather is going to be a huge factor in just how quickly pubs begin to recoup, some of their hugely lost income. And overnight, there's another threat, which is the Prime Minister tells us that we should not close our minds to the idea that we'd need to have a vaccine passport to get served in a pub. Now, how this works, if I take my 29-year-old son, who's too young to have a jab, or supposing you were 50 last week but haven't yet had a jab, do we have to take our birth certificates with us? I mean, the whole thing's nuts. And to put this level of compliance on publicans who are struggling like blooming crazy already, I think it's not been well thought through, and it would be a massive mistake to go down this route. I do understand that if my elderly grandmother was in a care home, yeah, I would want the people who are changing her in close contact with her to have had the jab. And I'm afraid if you work in the care home sector, I don't think you're going to have much choice about this. But to think that in this of all countries, we're heading towards this big brother state where we can be stopped in the street and demanded to show our papers. Not only is it offensive on a libertarian scale, but it's also concerning from an economic scale. Because the big pubs, the big pub chains with lots of staff will be able to handle whatever compliance is thrown at them. I know husbands and wives that are running pubs that are on the edge of giving up. And they're going to have to do a lot of this work themselves. So, I think there's going to be, in general, I think what you will see are people going back to the pub in very, very big numbers, provided the weather's okay. And that could mean that one or two of these quoted pub companies are now beginning, in terms of the stock market, to represent quite good value for money.
I was going to say the same thing about that value for money, but you've sort of made it a bit of an inappropriate thing to say almost, because of the suffering sector of these small pubs and private pubs that are
the
struggle.
worry, yeah. The worry, Nick, is, as with so much in this pandemic, that what you'll see are lots of small independent pubs, tenancies close down, and the big firms come in and hoover up, what's been left behind. And so often in this sector, we've seen this, haven't we? It's the local shoe retailer in the high street that goes bust, and Amazon that gets the benefit. It's one of there are lots of sad elements to what's happened over the course of the last year, not least the death and the suffering. But in economic terms, once again, it's the big boys that have won and the small guys that have lost.
A particular industry that doesn't lend itself to sympathy is the airline industry, and yet they've been absolutely hammered this week by the news of effectively holidays being banned, and you pay £5,000 in fine if you decide to go on a holiday. And the shock on the markets was quite extreme. So how do you think that's going to play out? And do you think people are going to go along with this ban on holidays?
Yeah, so it's 5,000. If you go to Calais, because you want to fill your boot up with wine, you haven't gone for a valid reason, it's a 5,000 quid fine. But come illegally by dinghy and we'll put you in a hotel. It's a separate debate, but I couldn't resist it. Look, if you look at the numbers right now, Italy, for example, has 4 times the number of people in intensive care beds per million of population than we do. and their daily coronavirus rates going through the roof, whilst ours, I'm pleased to say, is falling very, very sharply. France, I think, will be a red list country within 10 days, 2 weeks. So basically, there'll be no real travel feasible between here and France. And I suspect that even lorry drivers are going to be tested both sides of a channel. There could be quite a blockage, even more of a blockage than has been on goods, coming in and going out. And I think the prospect of foreign holidays this year for British people is gone. I don't think it's going to happen. And I know a lot of people have been buying British Airways, for example, because they think, hey, this thing's bottomed out. But I'm fearful there's worse to come. And I think if you look at the way the European Union are handling the vaccine rollout, indeed, look how the countries are handling it. I mean, who would have thought that the mighty Mrs. Merkel would announce a 5-day lockdown for Easter and then U-turn 24 hours later? I mean, it's truly incredible. It's truly incredible. And you and I, Nick, have touched on this in previous chats that we've had. I've talked about the concept of European solidarity breaking down as different countries go to Russia or China or wherever they go to try and get their own vaccine. But there's another dynamic here at play. And interestingly, Boris Johnson almost put his finger on it yesterday. To say that we will take over the means of production, which is effectively what Ursula von der Leyen has said, any GCSE student of politics knows that is pure Marxist communism. That is what the communist system intends to do. And they are now prepared to do this, despite the fact they put their order in 2 months after the UK, despite the fact, the agreement they signed actually was so badly written that supplies weren't guaranteed. It was just a best efforts kind of contract. Despite all of that, they're so desperate for the European population not to have rumbled how many thousands of them will die because of the incompetence of what's happened in Brussels, that they're now directly threatening industries. And, the threat against AstraZeneca, which, when you think about it, Pfizer will make billions out of this. AstraZeneca are doing it for no profit. And yet they've become the whipping boys of the European Commission. And longer term, economically, and Nick, both you and I are bears of the European Union, the Eurozone. But why would you, as a big Japanese investor, for argument's sake, why would you even contemplate sinking billions of dollars, euros into manufacturing plant in Europe if, when they get a bit uppity, they might just take over your factory? Far better to come to the United Kingdom. And again, I think it reinforces all the arguments that we've made, that in terms of the medium to long term of where you should invest your money, Brexit Britain, and I'm not just saying this with my UKIP Brexit Party hat on. I genuinely mean this, that Brexit Britain is a better place to be involved and invested for the medium long term than anywhere on the European continent.
I didn't think that the vaccine fast could get any worse for the EU, but it just has in the last few days on a scale that is beyond comical now. They've raided this plant in Italy and accusing the place of shipping vaccines to the UK in secret, but they were actually bound for Belgium and other developing countries. They've had this lack of approval for the production facilities still after so many months that they could have approved the manufacturing of this vaccine. They've had, as you said, this issue with Merkel. They've had actually recently, I read that the vaccine works better for older people than for young. And part of the story a few weeks ago was that it doesn't work for old people. So they couldn't be more wrong about everything, and it just keeps getting worse. My question to you, though, is what if it continues to get worse? I think we spoke privately a few months ago, actually, where you said that if Britain avoids another wave of COVID and Europe and, say, the US or other places do get another wave of COVID, then this starts to look a bit dangerous, really, because, the EU will really be accused of having fouled things up to the point where they've killed thousands of people.
Oh, literally, if you read today's Times, Bruno Waterfield, who was a veteran Brussels correspondent, someone that I've known for 20 years, and one of the very few journalists I actually respect because he tries to sort of write the truth. He's written an opinion piece about this in the Times today, where he's a very moderate figure. And Bruno says, no, literally these decisions will kill thousands of people, and there's lots of empirical evidence that backs that up. The other dynamic here, of course, that we haven't discussed is that because Macron, in this wonderful sort of Gallic fit of pique, wrote off the AstraZeneca vaccine. And by the way, I do wonder how much lobbying's been going on by giant pharma. Yeah, I wonder how much lobbying's been going on by the firms that are going to make billions out of this, whilst the Oxford AstraZeneca people are doing it effectively for charity. But he wrote it off. Merkel herself also said that it was ineffective. And now vast swathes of Europe won't take the vaccine because they've been told by their leaders it's rubbish. And I read a figure this morning that of 1 million people in Berlin who were entitled to have gone for jabs already, of 1 million, only 360,000 have gone. Now, you take this 6-9 months down the road, right? And by the way, I've been jabbed, and I'm almost as normal as I was before. No, but if we take this 6-9 months down the road, and it proves that AstraZeneca was a good drug, not only do you get the European Commission making a mess of this by ordering late, by extending whilst people were dying and businesses going bankrupt, they applied the precautionary principle, because they're terrified to make a decision and because they're bureaucratic and they're slow. But you've also had the leaders of the two biggest countries in Europe putting their own citizens off taking something that might have saved their lives. If you think about all of that, don't tell me populism's over in Europe. It might not have even started.